everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my Creating a Great Tone series for our Line 6 Helix. Today I'm going to cover a topic that I actually probably should have covered a long time ago. I've had a number of questions over the past while, and I've seen a lot of questions posted online with a lot of folks asking how the best way is to incorporate external effects pedals or external effects or even hardware devices in with our Helix so that we can incorporate them into our signal path. There's a couple of ways we can do this. Today, the funny thing is to do this video, I don't really have a lot of effects pedals anymore. Since acquiring my Helix, I kind of got rid of all of them because I didn't really have any need for them. I'm very happy and very satisfied with what the Helix offers as far as effects and amps and distortion and whatnot. But there are a lot of folks who do have external effects. Maybe it's a favorite delay pedal, maybe it's a favorite reverb, maybe it's a favorite overdrive pedal, who knows? It could be anything that we want to incorporate into our signal path. So how do we do this? Well, today I'm going to use the one pedal that I do have, which is this guy right here, which is the Bogner-Lagrange overdrive pedal. It's kind of a Marshall Plexi in a pedal type of effects pedal. It's one of my favorites. They're a wonderful sounding pedal. I really like Bogner effects pedals actually. Their red and their blue overdrive pedals are really spectacular, which are based off of the different channels of the Ecstasy amp. So I just thought I would use this. Obviously what I'm going to talk about today here could be used with delay pedals or any hardware device really that we want to incorporate into our signal path. So let's take a distortion pedal, for instance. This is a good example for talking about how to hook it up to our Helix, because some folks might say, well, I usually have my distortion pedal as one of the first things in the chain. So I'll just plug my guitar into the input of my distortion pedal out of this and into the instrument input on my Helix and done, right? And that would work, that would be fine, and then we would always be stuck with having our overdrive pedal or this overdrive pedal at the beginning of our chain. It works. But what if we want to do something else? Maybe we want to use one of the wah pedals from the Helix and put it before our distortion. Or maybe we want a flanger and we want it before our distortion. Or the ability to move it before or after depending on what we're doing. Well, that's going to obviously make it difficult because the effects in the Helix are built into the Helix and there would be no way of putting them before the overdrive pedal, in this case the Lagrange pedal, if it was just sort of plugged with our guitar into the overdrive pedal and then that going into the instrument input. So what are some alternatives? Well, we're going to talk today about how we can use the send and returns inputs and outputs on our Helix and how we can use effects loop blocks and send and return blocks within our Helix to allow us to integrate a pedal such as this into our signal path and have the flexibility to move it around, okay? First things first though, let's talk a little bit about what we have to make sure of as far as the global settings on the Helix go. For this example today, I'm going to be hooking my Lagrange pedal up to the send and return number 1, so the effects loop number 1 on my Helix hardware, okay? So a little word about how that's going to be hooked up. As we can see here, we have an input and an output on our pedal, as most pedals will, right? So how does this have to be hooked up? Well, the input, we obviously want the signal flowing into this. So we have to hook this to a send on our Helix unit. So the Helix would be sending the signal path out and it would be coming in to our pedal, okay? Then we would take our output, which is going to send the signal out of our pedal and return it or put it into the return of the effects loop on our Helix. I hope that makes sense. So just think of a signal path flowing, right? So we're going to have the signal sent from the Helix to the input and it's going to come out of the pedal back to the return on the Helix. Okay, so that's how that would have to be set up. But there is another thing, and we're going to jump down to our Helix right now and take a look at how we have to make sure we have our settings set for that particular effects loop, right? We have two choices. We can set it as line input or an instrument input, okay? We have to have that set correctly. In this case, this is designed to have a guitar plugged into it. We won't want this to be, our send and our return to be set as instrument, okay? But it depends on what device you're trying to integrate into the Helix. We may want to send it a line signal if the device that we are trying to incorporate in requires a line signal. So let's jump down to our Helix. We'll take a look at how to do that, and then we'll come back up here, okay? So here we are down on our Helix, and I apologize for the handheld video. I apologize for the dusty Helix, and I apologize for the lighting. I hope everything's clear here. But what we're going to do to set up the inputs to receive the proper signal is we're going to go to our global settings up here, our hamburger button, right? We're going to come to global settings, and we have our ins and outs, and we see down here we have one set of parameters to control. But we're going to page over, and we're going to see send, return 1, send, return 2, send, return 3, send, return 4. So what I'm going to do is, since I'm using send, return 1, it was already set to instrument because I had it set there. But I just turn this, and you can see we can either go between instrument and line for any of these, okay? So for what we need in this particular situation, we will set it to instrument. You know, if what you needed to send was a line signal out, then that's exactly what you would do, right? So that could be sent to line as such, but that's how we set it up. So basically, if we go back home, there's our preset, our little hamburger button here, global settings, ins and outs, page over, and that's going to give you the ability to be able to set it as you need. All right, let's go back up and take a look at our preset. Okay, so now that we have that all set up, we have the send and return number 1 set to instrument, which is going to match up with the pedal that I'm using, which is the Bogner-Lagrange. I've actually hooked the cables up as I described before. So we're all set. This is hooked into the effects loop, okay? So we now want to integrate it into our signal path. So let's go over to HX Edit for a second. And here we are. I've set up, based off my template, just a really quick little preset here. Using, now let's bring this over to a 160 ribbon with a few inches back. I have a 412 greenback 25 going into a Cali, Texas channel 1, just set very clean, okay? Nothing really special going on here. Okay. I didn't really optimize these. I just getting a tone to show you how we can incorporate our pedal into this. Okay, so since I have the Bogner-Lagrange pedal hooked into our effects loop number 1, or send 1 and return 1, I go over to our send and return category over here. And now I've got some options. I have send 1 all the way through send 4, return 1 all the way through return 4, and effects loop 1 all the way through effects loop 4. So some folks might ask what that is. Well, send 1 and return 1, when combined, are going to become effects loop 1. So that's what we're using here. We're combining the two. Line 6, I think, was very smart about separating the ability to use the sends and returns separately, because we could use the sends just to tap into our signal path at one point. And I've done a video about this in the past, and send it out to a different place, maybe to front of house after a cabinet, but sending it to something like the power cab if we're going to use a speaker modeling before the speaker cab. So it adds a lot of flexibility. There's also some other creative options we can use with it, but for this, we're going to be using the effects loop block for now, and I'll show you why that is in a second. So the effects loop 1 is what I'm hooked into. So what I would want to do is I would want to come up to my path, choose an empty block, go back to my send and return category, grab effects loop 1, all right, and add that in. Now what I've essentially done is I've added in, since my Bogner-Lagrange pedal is added into is hooked up to effects loop 1, the number 1 send and return, I've added that into the signal path. So one really important point is I would always want my effects pedal engaged or turned on. So right now I have the Bogner-Lagrange turned on. We're no longer going to use that pedal to control its on and off state. I hope that makes sense, and you'll see why in a second, okay? So I've turned the block off. I still have just my normal path that I had shown you a moment ago. Let's save that as a snapshot then. Let's call that clean. But now let's go to snapshot 2, and we'll call this, you know, overdrive. And I wish I could spell. All right, there we go. Now, what I'm going to do for snapshot 2 is turn this on. As soon as I turn that on, I have now introduced the overdrive pedal into the signal path. So what you're hearing is all of the overdrive is coming from my external Bogner-Lagrange pedal. Sounds very nice. I love that pedal. It's a great sounding pedal. So now if I go back to snapshots, I can now switch that Bogner in and out of my signal path simply by going between the snapshots. Snapshot 1, clean. Snapshot 2. And the Bogner's in the path. Okay. Notice I did not have to touch the actual overdrive pedal. It's going to be handled all through snapshots. And that's the beauty of incorporating our effects into the signal path via a effects loop rather than just sort of having it before the Helix and plugging our guitar into it, like I mentioned before, okay? The other advantage to this is, well, let's say I wanted, I don't know, maybe a flanger on here. And I decide to put the flanger before the distortion. Let's say I wanted to very quickly move it after the distortion. Well, because I have the distortion pedal in as an effects loop, I can just drag this over, and now I've changed the order of those pedals. We're now going to hear the Lagrange pedal before the flanger. It gives us a really easy way to move things around that way. So by doing it this way, we can actually incorporate the pedal into our signal path and almost treat it like it's an internal effects processor that's inside of the Helix, even though it isn't. So we want to keep it turned on all the time and allow it to be controlled via snapshots. Or we could even control it in pedal mode and assign it to a foot switch. So really flexible when working this way. Now the other option also would be, and this might seem kind of crazy if I get rid of that, is I could also use like separate, you know, send and return blocks. I don't know, in this case this would be kind of silly, but just to show you that there are creative ways to use this, I could actually have the send coming in at this point and then add a return block, you know, somewhere else, return number 1. So my signal is going to be sent to the Bogner out of here, and the signal from the Bogner is going to be returned here. That's going to sound terrible. So not something we'd probably do in this case, but there is always that flexibility if you want to get creative, maybe with delays or reverb or whatever. The option is there, and that's kind of what's important. So this was a really interesting way of working, I think, with external effects. Now the other thing about the effects loop block is we have separate control over the amount of signal we send into it, the amount of signal we return from it, and the mix as well, and trails. In the case of the distortion, I'm probably not going to be too worried about trails, but if we were incorporating a reverb or delay pedal where when we switch snapshots, we want that to continue and not just be chopped off, maybe the echoes, we would turn the trails on. I could also use the mix control. Let me turn the flanger off here. I could also use the mix control to mix in some of the dry signal. So here I am with nothing but the dry signal. I could blend in a little bit of the distortion pedal. If we wanted a mix of the distortion and the clean, right? but that would be up to personal preference. So what happens if I bring the send down? Well, it's obviously going to hit less signal into the distortion pedal, cleaning up our tone. You know, something else that we could incorporate into snapshots if we wanted, right? So we do have some flexibility with those controls, but as is, it works nicely to just incorporate that pedal. And all the distortion you're hearing is straight from the Bogner overdrive pedal. I hope that kind of helps some folks who had questions about that. I know this is probably something a lot of folks already do and already know. Probably not the video for you if it is. But for those folks that I do see asking that, I hope that clears up and makes it a lot easier for you to know how you could incorporate your external effects into your Helix path. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm not really going to put anything on custom tone because there's really nothing to put on custom tone unless you have the Bogner Lagrange pedal. It's not going to do you much good, and the exact settings that I have. But this will work with any effects processor or pedals that you want to incorporate into the Helix. All right. So thanks again for tuning in. Like the video, share it if you don't mind. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll be back soon with some more content. Thanks for tuning in, and ciao for now.